and it's always like,
Yeah, yeah.
meeting. Like, oh my God, please stop texting me. And I just figured out how to silence that. And I was like, oh, months later. Okay. There we go. Cool, we're live. I will
Cool.
post. Let me just post and let folks know we're live. And then I cannot multitask. Okay, cool. I know I saw Allie, probably from you sharing it. I saw Allie just like saw it and was like, oh, it's so much fun. I was like, yes, come join us. Come have a beer. We'll see who joins.
Is it, where in the US are you right now?
I'm in Eastern Pennsylvania. I'm like an hour north of Philly.
Okay, cool. Do you guys have a lot of snow right now?
Mm-hmm. We got, I haven't been outside. I work from home now, luckily, but my partner said it was pretty bad. He took my truck. I think we got like 6, 8 inches somewhere. Yeah. But it looks icy. You're in the Northeast, right?
I'm in Rhode Island, yeah. And they keep saying that it's gonna snow, and it's kind of like little flurries right now. Like there's not a huge amount, but I mean, I'm assuming it's probably just coming tomorrow, like instead.
Does Rhode Island get as much snow being right on the water?
So like when we get snow, we get snow, but I will say that you get more if you're like more inland. Like my mom lives like right on the water, and sometimes she'll get like a little bit less snow, I think because of that influence. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I know my friends, because I'm originally from New Jersey, but like northern Jersey, and friends who are like down the shore on the beach, they don't really get snow. Like they'll just get a lot of rain and it'll flood. And I'm like, I don't understand how that happens, but you're northwest, sure what that.
Yeah, I know if my mom lives like on the water. My dad lives more like inland, and like he definitely gets dumped on more than she does.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Interesting. What are you working on?
So my partner wanted to learn to knit and bless their soul. But I kind of like took over. So every night I just like sneak in a couple of rows. It's like, yeah, it's just like really just like a like large infinity scarf that I'm knitting. It's like literally just garter. Like I'm using straight needles. Like this is like really retro. But I didn't want to use any of my circulars because I have like 100 projects going. But I was like, why don't I finish that for you? Yeah. It was looking a little, I don't know. It was looking a little like it needed a little help. That's all I'll say.
Let me help you there.
Yeah, I was like, oh, okay, I'll take over for that. Yeah.
Okay. They're wanting to learn to knit of their own volition, or was that with encouragement?
I think it was like of their own volition, but then I think they just kind of lost steam. You know what I mean? So then like me being me, I was like, well, you can't just like have 3 skeins of that yarn and like not have it get knit up. So I was like, okay, so like why don't I finish it? But I have so many projects that I literally keep it right by my bed, and like I'll do like 3 rows a night. Yeah, like we're only like 9 rows in.
What yarn is that? Because it's beautiful.
It's actually just like a mistake. I like screwed up a bunch of my arts and crafts colorway. I know there are no mistakes in yarn dyeing, but yeah. But it basically what happened was I like messed up the process and it just became like more purple, like way more purple than it's supposed to be. So then I just like have a bunch of skeins and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna make Tom some of these because they'll like it. Yeah. Yeah.
That's so funny. And I say this mostly out of curiosity because every night while I'm sitting on the couch with Michael, I'm like, I could get so much more knitting done if Michael knew how to knit and have like been trying to get him to, and he's not interested. He's like, no, you can do that. All the yarn is yours. That's fine. And I'm like, okay. But I made him knit like 3 or 4 stitches on one of my projects. And Jake, I was like almost angry that he picked it up so
Mhm.
I was like, I didn't even need to tell him what to do. I was like, you put that needle in. And he was like, oh, like this? And I was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Machine here. We got our sweaters done in like days, Michael. And he was like, no, thanks. I'm good. Here you go. I was like, oh, okay, dream gone.
Yeah, one of my other friends, Dan, I like dyed him a bunch of or like 4 skeins for like this really simple garter shawl because it was his first time knitting. And so I'm a continental knitter because
Okay.
I went like crochet to knitting.
Mhm.
So I showed him continental and he was just sort of like, what is this? This doesn't make sense. But then as soon as I showed him English, he was like, boop, boop, boop. And then like he was great at it. But
That makes sense.
yeah, I don't know. I cannot, the only time I ever use English is when I'm doing color work and it's like so hard to switch my brain. But yeah.
It's funny because I've been knitting. I knitted before I crocheted, and it's when I crochet, my fingers hurt, and I think it's because I'm English, so I'm not used to using my left hand for
Yeah.
tensioning yarn. But when I was like, I want to try and make myself knit continentally because I want to knit faster, and
Yeah.
I was like, this is like painfully slow. Why am I doing this? I don't care if I knit. I feel like it's like
Yeah. I mean, when I do English knitting, like I'm definitely going slower, but like my gauge gets like wonky a little bit because it's like so loose and stuff. Yeah. But I have noticed that like with continental, like I engage my left hand so much that like this, whatever this muscle is right here, and then like here, they get like rock hard. So I use a dish towel and I put a golf ball under it and I roll the golf ball into my palm to like release that muscle. It's like some days it's so bad I can't even use my hand.
that's what I get when I crochet. Even if I crochet for like an hour or two, I'm like, oh, I can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's
So
so
what?
painful. Gosh. Also, we have 3 people here. That might include me. I don't know, but there's at least 2 other people here. So hello, whoever's here. Welcome. Thanks for coming. Mia, if it's you. Hi, Mia. I don't know, Jake. Do you know Mia, the yarn goddess?
Um, I might. I recognize a lot of people like by their like profile photos. So like I don't want to be rude and say no, but then like
You probably would if you saw her. She like tests a bajillion patterns and she's amazing. And she's 14
oh
and
cool.
she is she's just amazing. She's like an amazing human, but she told me one day that she sent me a DM and was like, I just want you to know that I come to all of your videos, but because I'm only 14, I'm not allowed to write comments on YouTube. So
Oh,
I know. So every time I say hi, in case Mia's watching,
I
um,
love that. Well, Mia, I hope you're here.
it like melted my heart. I was like, I want to be Mia when I grow up. And um, but let's jump in. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. So welcome everyone. If you're here live, thanks for joining us. If you're catching us later on my YouTube channel, thanks for checking us out. Welcome to week 16 of the Self-Care Collaborative. 16 is a long time. That's like 4 months.
Wait, I didn't even know it was week 16 of this, and that's my lucky number. Isn't that so? That's crazy.
That's weird
Yeah.
and cool. I like when the universe does some things like that.
Yeah.
So that's cool. Week 16, Jake's lucky number. I hope it's week 16. If I mess it up and it's not, it's going to be really funny. But I think it is week 16. If this is your first time checking us out, thanks for checking us out. There's 15 other videos on my channel with some really incredible makers to go watch after this one, obviously. And if this is not your first time, thanks for coming back. If you're watching videos, make sure you are playing along, participating along over on Instagram using the hashtag Self-Care Collaborative 2020. I know it's 2021, but we started last year. So that's what it is. And if you're using, that's just what it is.
Yeah.
If you're using the hashtag on your posts, make sure to tag me so I can see what you're doing and what you're working on, even if it's not a crafty project and it's just yourself. And we are almost, this is the last week of February. Next week's the last week of February. So next week, so this is the second to last video before the giveaway prize for February is chosen, and it's going to be a skein of my yarn. So if you don't have your post in yet, definitely get your post in and use the hashtag. Okay, that's all my housekeeping stuff, I think. I'm super excited tonight. I was telling Jake that I'm a little bit obsessed with him and like also don't know that much about him. So I'm just super excited to get to know him a little bit more. I know lots of others are too. So why don't you, Jake, go ahead and introduce yourself. Jake, not Ken, because I know that's a thing.
It is a thing. My name is Jake. I am an independent yarn dyer from Rhode Island. My brand name is Ken Yarn. It is a play on my last name, which is Kenyon. Kenyan. You can find me on Instagram at is that Ken Yarn. Yeah, I'm from the littlest state, and I recently left my full-time job to become a full-time yarn dyer, which is like doesn't feel real and is incredibly exciting and I guess a little bit anxiety provoking too. But it's a mixed bag of emotions and it's been great. Yeah, and thank you for having me.
Of course. So I know as a yarn dyer, I'm like the most excited and also most scared for you because I'm like, oh my God, it's so exciting. And also like that's scary to have that be your full-time gig. But I'm also really curious just to hear about your journey in this community before I found you, maybe years or so ago. So I don't know too much about how you got into crafting, how you got into dyeing, and sort of what that evolution looked like for you.
So I started crocheting, I think in 2015 during grad school. I was making like headbands for classmates and like I was like selling them for cash, like, you know, like totally low key. Then somebody was like, oh, you should, Etsy was like in its primal form at that point, and they were, you know, they were sort of like, you should make an Etsy. So I kind of just was like, I'll make an Etsy. And you know, then I like crocheted some things on there and they were like bad. Oh, like bad, you know, like, so after I left college, I basically, I guess I kind of crocheted in the year after, but it was more like a transition year because I actually have a master's in speech pathology. So after I left grad school, I needed to do like sort of, it's like this clinical fellowship year in between. And so I did that year and kind of like put some things, put like making on the back burner kind of. And it was only when I moved to like circa like maybe like end of 2016, like fall, I moved to Boston, like Quincy. So not Boston. People in Boston would be mad that I said it was in Boston, but whatever, Boston for everybody who's listening from across the world. I moved to Quincy and I kind of got more into more into crocheting, like more like finished pieces. Like I was doing a lot of like, you know, like Alexi from Two of Wands was like the really big influencer. So I was like crocheting a lot of her stuff.
Mm.
And I was like, you know, I should make an Instagram for this stuff. So I think I started off as like, because like originally my Etsy shop was called Hoot Hoot Stitches because I love owls. And then it transformed into like Jake Kenyon Designs, but like I wasn't designing anything. So I don't know where I got off making that my handle. And so then for like, yeah, so I think for like the next year, I just sort of like, I closed my Etsy shop, but then like became more active on Instagram. And that's kind of when I found out that like other people were dyeing yarn. And I just am someone who I'm just really interested in like the technical aspect of stuff, you know. Even knitting and crocheting, I was like, well, I want to know how this yarn was made. Like, you know, like how is yarn made? And then, so when I started to see dyers like Woolen Boone and Madeline Tosh and Hello Stella, you know, popping up these sort of like mini yarn dyers at the time, I was like, well, maybe I could do that. So I bought like the bare essentials and kind of just like started to dye yarn in my kitchen. And I made a website and I rebranded, and I came up, you know, that's when Ken Yarn was born. And the, you know, like my handle is that Ken Yarn is more of a play on like when someone says, you know, is that Gucci? Like, but like, so, you know, but I just love it, you know? So I think that that's part of me that is really embedded in there, even though people might not know it. Also the handle at Ken Yarn is taken. So it's like, whatever, but, yeah. So and then I started to do that. And so I dyed yarn on the side for, oh God, like I guess it would be like 2 full calendar years. And then last year, or 3, no, yeah, 3.5-ish, I think. And then yeah, and then I recently just like when the pandemic hit, I think a lot of things just kind of got like reframed for me as far as like where my priorities were. You know, like I was working on the front lines, and I say I was working, I still am practicing speech pathologist 1 day a week. I stayed per diem for my old job, you know, because I love that part of my life. And but I, you know, so, but it is a lot, you know what I mean? Being on the front lines, like dealing with everything that comes with that every day, you know, in between April and May, like I had COVID, and, you know, it's been sort of like a wild year. And so coming out of it, like coming out of COVID, like just like the illness itself, I was sort of like, okay, like, let's like revisit like what makes us truly happy and like what makes us feel like inspired. And I sort of like started to do a lot, I guess I moved into my new studio. I ramped up production. And that's kind of when I got the momentum to get to where I am now. But like before that, like I always say that I guess my moment when I like got put on the map, I guess if you would call it, like if I had to choose a few moments, it probably started, I was featured in the first round of bloggers for the Hook Nook blog. Back when it was brand new, you know what I mean? Like it was the first round. I remember I got picked in like, I was in a snowstorm and I got the email, and I was like in the car, like stuck in a snowbank. And I was just so happy. And I was like, oh my God, people are going to know who I am. But yeah, so that was really exciting. And then I remember on Easter Day that it was like, I think that was in like December. And then like the next April on Easter Day, Tony of TL Yarn Crafts, who's now one of my best friends, reached out to me and was like, hey, do you want to dye a bunch of yarn for this shawl I'm doing? And I was like, what? And I was like at the Easter dinner table. I still tell her the story and she cracks up. But I was like, yes. I'm like, I will do literally anything to work with you. yeah. And so then that, I think that gave me a lot of momentum too. But I think that, like, I love collaboration. So you've probably seen me working with a lot of people. It's kind of where I feel like I get my like biggest like adrenaline rush is like working with other people and like making a concept come together to like tell a story, but like including other people. I think that my collections are like not just inspired by like well, they're inspired by a theme. Obviously there's a theme and a concept, but like it's more like storytelling, or at least I try to make it storytelling. Like when you look at my skeins, like I want there to be like a clear like understanding of like, okay, there's like a lot of like weird work that went into this. Yeah, so like I did my last year, I did my Camp Ken yarn collection, which will be back this summer. Everybody's asked it, not the same colorways, but we're going back to camp. Yeah, we're going back to camp. And I have a collection coming in March that is top secret, but it is so fun and involves so many people, and I can't stop laughing about how like I keep saying this is so dumb, but it's just so much fun. Like, and I think that that's what I need right now. I just need like brevity and laughter. And so yeah, so I'm working on that. And I just wrapped up a wholesale order of a collection inspired by the ex-wives of Henry VIII. And so, yeah, they're all so campy and so funny, and the names are just ridiculous. But that's what I love to do. I love to work with other people. And that's kind of, I guess that's kind of been my trajectory from like me knitting, like me using like those like self-striping yarns to make like double crochet scarves. Not that there's anything wrong with double crochet scarves, but there is like a, yeah.
Did you ever imagine looking back 5 years from now that this is where you would be?
No. Like I think in my mind, like I wanted to be like Alexi of Two of Wands. Like, you know what I mean? Like I was like, I'm going to be like a blogger and a designer, and like, and then you just kind of like find your niche, you know what I mean? And there's like a million yarn dyers and they're all great. Like every yarn dyer is great. And like, I feel like I just try to make work that sets me apart and like sort of like, yeah.
I so appreciate hearing your journey. I didn't realize, Jake, how much our stories were similar in a lot of ways. Like I knew how to knit when I was younger, but like in grad school is really when it started picking up for me. And it was the same people making for friends in classes, and then like started Etsy, and I was like, okay. And looking back and like, this is so embarrassing. Like, I don't want people to see those pictures. But I really hear, and I don't know that this, I've said it on my channel too sometimes, I'm a therapist by day, so I think I so resonate with hearing that piece of like what you do when you're like a frontline worker, a healthcare worker, and like it's such a different world to be in. Like you're working with people, but in such a different way than I think creating yarn and collaborating. And so I love hearing that like narrative of how that is there, but like evolved over time in your journey.
Yeah. And I love practicing speech therapy. You know what I mean? Like every Sunday I work at the hospital, and it keeps me on my toes. You know what I mean? Like it helps me to see things in a different light, and it's just really kind of exciting. But like, I think a lot of people who are therapists, or like let's call a spade. People pick up knitting and crocheting in grad school because you want to cry every day. Like you don't have to beat around the bush. Like I was like, oh, I need something to do besides cry. So like maybe I'll pick up yarn and needles. Yeah. I know. And I've talked to other people who are like, yeah, I learned to knit during grad school too. And I was like, okay, I see you.
Yeah. Or like, not even something to do beside cry, but like I just need something to do with my hands while I'm crying, because all the time. So having something else to do would be nice.
Yeah.
Um, but I am kind of curious too. I mean, we're like joking about it, but it's also like very real that crafting, I think, comes to a lot of people as part of their self care or as part of like nurturing something during really difficult times. And I'm curious to hear like how self care has evolved for you over time and like if that journey maps onto your creative journey at all, or if that feels like it's something separate.
Yeah. So I guess when I think about like, okay, let's just say like for me, anxiety is the feeling of loss of control, right? So I think a lot of us who are knitters who go to knitting and crocheting who are anxious, knitting is good for a large number of things: depression, anxiety, stress, you name it. But like specifically for me, anxiety like was an issue. And I feel like, if I wasn't going to be able to have control of
Mm-hmm.
grad school, I was going to be able to have control of like nice stitches, stuff like that. And I think that that's a lot of, it gave me that feeling of control. But I think that, I mean, thinking about like self-care as like self-care for me started as crafting. So that was my self-care. But as I transitioned from like someone who was like using their craft as self-care to someone who was using their craft as a way of making income, your self-care all of a sudden like switches. You're like, okay, well, do I really want to knit when I just spent all day playing with yarn? So for me, like now that I'm full-time, like I still get joy from knitting. I knit every day, even if it's one row, I knit every single day. But I think I have started to lean on other things that make me happy. Like, like I recently got like, I just got a Peloton, and like just to be able to like get that energy out is really great. I've made a goal for this year for reading more because I've started to realize like it can't always be yarn. And sometimes when I sit down to do a yarn craft, I'm like, okay, I'm not really feeling this right now, which is why it takes me 17 years to complete anything. But like I also, yeah, so I guess it has changed. But I also make, I call them palette cleansers. I actually just talked about this with somebody else, how like everybody loves like, oh, like this year I'm doing a Barbie monthly club. Like every month I do a mystery colorway inspired by a Barbie doll that's like retro or new or, oh yeah, and my Ken and Bobby sweatshirt. So like I have so much fun doing those because number one, they're one of a kind. I use the colorway for that time. I don't have to repeat the colorway. There's no pressure and there's no expectation to recreate the colorway. And also it's like, oh, I just get to kind of like free form dye yarn in the studio. It's not in a huge quantity necessarily. And I purposely do stuff like that throughout the year, like scattered to kind of like keep me fresh and alive. Like I could never dye the same colorway like a billion times. And I see a lot of other dyers have like dyer fatigue because of that. And granted, there are colorways that are amazing and it's so great that you make money off of them, but like at what cost sometimes, like everybody loves my telekinesis colorway and I do too, but I dyed a lot of telekinesis in 2020. Yeah, so kind of like, I think that a big part of self-care is also like identifying when you need to engage in self-care. And so for me, it's putting sometimes limits on like, okay, maybe we don't need to dye this 500 more times.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing a few things here. And like part of it is I like to have some variety in how I take care of myself. And that shifted a little bit. Now that like yarn is my full-time job, it sounds like you're being really intentional about making sure you have other ways to, I don't know, feel excited, get energy out, recharge, whatever that looks like. But it also sounds like you're being really intentional about how you're doing your work and like creating colorways that are one of a kind and not having some sort of expectation to bring them back to the shop or have to open a pre-order again or like do things like that. And I don't know, it reminds me of what you said when you started here, and Adela said it, was it last week on Grocery Girls, that like I don't need to dye all the yarn in the world. And like
Yeah.
doing that would probably not be good for me, or like I don't know, it's just not necessary. It's there are so many yarn dyers out there,
Yeah.
and to put yourself through, I don't know, hell, for a lack of a better word, like, and really do a disservice to yourself or like burn out from doing something that you could really enjoy as your
Yeah.
job. It's like that's such a shame to get stuck in.
Yeah. And it's sort of like, it goes without saying, like, yes, I'm like so grateful that people are showing up and buying my product. Like, absolutely. But there is a certain line you cross when it becomes like, okay, I need to maybe do something else for a little bit.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But also like like this year, like being a full-time yarn dyer, like I didn't make the decision overnight.
Mhm.
There were kind of a few months building up to it. So I kind of like sat down with like my 2021 calendar and I was like, okay, how are we going to avoid burnout? Like, when are we going to sneak in our palette cleansers? So like, I would like write down like this special project, like I'm doing a special project for my birthday. I'm doing a special project for Halloween, like things that can be like, okay, cool. I can do that and feel like jazzed up about the next thing.
Yeah. Is that something that like comes natural to you? Because part of it sounds like it's planning and like being good at thinking ahead. Part of it also sounds like it's sticking to that when and like holding to your boundaries, even when there might be like, oh man, I wish there was more of this colorway. Like we
Yeah.
want more of this, and being like, that's just not in.
Yeah. I always work into my schedule, like time that what if something does really good, like allowing people to order more of it. And like, I'm a sucker. Like I'll be on here saying like, oh, I don't want to open another pre-order of something. But like, if people ask for it a lot, I'm like, okay, fine, I'll do it, but there is like I did 2 telekinesis pre-orders and it was like, okay, after the second one, I was like, all right, we got to slow down a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I also like the good thing is that like it's my business and like sure, if you want me to open up a pre-order, I'll open up a pre-order, but it's only going to be open within these parameters, like this many skeins or like this much time, because I know I'm like, if I open up a pre-order for 500 skeins of yarn, it's like, that's going to be a whole week of the same thing, so stuff like that. Yeah. It is, it's truly a balancing act. And I think every person goes through that, but
Yeah. It sounds like I want to say doing a good job. I don't know if it feels like that, but at least like being thoughtful about having a plan and not being so rigid in it that like, yeah, there's a little flex and you're going to account for that happening because you know that that is how life works.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's just knowing yourself. It's like knowing what you can like endure. You know what I mean? I mean, there's some people who can put their head down and just work. And then there's other people like, me who, I maybe in the middle of the day, I might just like, go for a walk, or like one morning of the week, it's like, yeah, I plan to go to the studio, but like right now I'm really just feeling like reading a book and like leaning into that because there are nights at the studio where like it could be 10:30 at night and I could be like, you know what, I definitely have another 2 hours in me, so like let's do it. It's just going, it's sort of like being in tune with your body, I guess. Yeah.
Is that something that like you've always been good at? Have you had to work to like learn to read yourself, or did that sort of come naturally to you?
No, that came with practice. And also like I'm on here being like, yeah, I know my body so well, but like I'm the king of like not eating lunch sometimes. And like my partner is like I'll come home with a lunchbox that's full and like I'm hangry and they're like, oh, so you didn't eat all day? And I'm like, it wasn't on purpose. Like, So like there's certain things that I am good at. Like I feel like I'm good at like energy boundaries, but sometimes I'm not good at like physical like body wise. Like I'm like, okay, like you should probably take a break today because your knees hurt, or like, oh, you should probably eat something right now. Like I can sometimes be bad at that, at least when I'm in work mode.
Yeah. I also appreciate hearing that, because I think that's something too, like I get questions about, or other makers, when I was like, hey, do you want to do this thing? They're like, no, I'm not like good at self-care. I'm still figuring it out. And I'm like, no, like that's fun. That's part of it. That's what being human is.
Yeah.
It's not like being perfect at the thing. And so I appreciate your sharing a peek behind the curtain, that like, I know some stuff and there are other things I'm still like working on and could probably be better at.
Oh, for sure. Like sometimes I just drink way too much coffee and don't eat. And I just feel like I'm like one glass of spilt milk away from literal tears.
Mhm.
But then other days I'm like, I wake up, I exercise, I go to the studio, I come home at 5 p.m. You know, it is really easy. People don't, that's the thing. It's like it would be really easy for me to work 7 to 7, but who is that benefiting?
Mhm.
You know, like who's
Yeah.
a 12-hour day benefiting all the time? And like granted, when I need to get stuff done, like maybe I'll have some of those days, but again, it's just a balancing act, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. I think you're right though, because I think that's the scary part of being like, oh, you're a full-time dyer now. It's like, oh, you're a full-time dyer now. You're your own boss. And
Yeah.
I don't know. And when I'm like scared, I don't know, that I'm not going to have enough money to like eat or pay my rent, I would probably be like, maybe I should work extra hard tonight.
Yeah.
And you're not, I don't know. Sometimes it's nice when you have a boss that I'm like, well, these are the limits. Like, this is what I'm getting paid for. So it's easier to step away from it rather than it being your total responsibility. Where like you're saying, I think it's easier to be like, oh, I'll just work a few extra hours here, a few extra hours there.
Yeah. And that is, I mean, those, those fears are like real ones. I'm like, oh God, like, but again, I think with every small business, it's like believe, it's sort of like that like leap of faith. It's like trust in your product, trust in yourself. And, at the end of the day, like, I mean, for me, like I'm lucky where like, like I also am still working as a speech pathologist, and yeah, I never turn down work. You know what I mean? I'm like always kind of willing to hustle. Yeah.
Imagine it's nice to, maybe this is an assumption here. Maybe I'm projecting too much of my own thoughts on you, but I'm like, I mean, if you decide that like, oh, this isn't it for me, or I want to scale back, like you could always go back to.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. And like I certainly don't want that to be the plan, but like I mean I had to be realistic too. Like I had to make sure like the numbers were there and like, and I had things lined up for this year that were, could get me work. And yeah.
Mhm.
It's not, there's no guidebook, like there's no like manual, and like it was terrifying. And I'm sure that like any person that you could ask that went from like a full-time job to a creative small business like feels the exact same way. It's like scary. Yeah.
Mhm.
Like I'll have like these random like just like moments during the day where I'm like, oh my God. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about with there being no guidebook, because I tell Michael on the reg that when I binge like 8 hours of Shark Tank, it's because I'm really learning about business.
Yeah. Yeah.
Reason why.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's so funny. I love Shark
Um,
Tank. I love when
um,
people, wait, can we just caveat on Shark Tank for a second? Like, I always find it so funny when people like I get this comment all the time, all the time. I show people my yarn and they go, you should be on Shark Tank. And I go, what would I do on Shark Tank? And they're like, well, you could like show them your yarn. And I'm like, there are thousands of other people doing this. Yarn is sold in stores. I'm like, there is nothing innovative.
Okay, I am so glad you say that, because the first time that really happened for me, because like yarn was always a smaller thing for me, and now that it's becoming like more of a business, it feels like, rather than a hobby. I tell people, I'm not embarrassed to tell people I do it. And so this year, it might have been the end of last year, I went to the dentist and I like had my knitting with me, obviously, because
Yeah.
when do you not take your knitting with you? And he was like, "Oh, what is that?" It was a sweater. And I think he's known like a little bit about fiber arts. Someone and maybe his daughter had like crocheted or knitted. And he was like asking me about it. And I was like, "Oh, well, I dyed the yarn." And he was like, he must have thought I invented dyeing yarn, but he was like, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Are you going to like try and scale that business up?" And I was like, "This isn't a new thing. Like, this isn't a new,
Yeah.
I am literally one of many." And like, no, scaling things up looks like Lion Brand. So like they can do that. That's not what I'm doing really. And
Yeah.
he's so confused about it. He's like, "But can't you get more dyers in and like train them how to do it and then sell it to manufacturers?" And I was like, I mean, I guess I could, but like, no, that's not the trajectory.
Sometimes I'll be like, have you ever watched Shark Tank? Like when someone says that, I'm like, do you know what the premise of the show is? It's like innovative new inventions that people, yeah, it's whatever. It cracks me up every time someone says that. I'm like, okay, no. But yeah.
So funny. Okay, but I'm also really curious because I'm just curious to know this about other makers. So hearing the piece of like, as someone who has anxiety or has anxious moments, knowing that knitting, I think, brings that sense of control is like an obvious thing. I teach, so I work at a college counseling center, and so a lot of students are interested in knitting. So I started like a knitting workshop, mostly for students to deal with like stress and anxiety. And I think that's a big part of it. Like, oh, this is something I'm literally controlling every stitch, what I'm doing with the yarn. And is that still the case for you when you're knitting? Are you a perfectionist in your knitting? Are you okay with knowing that, I don't know?
I think I started off as a perfectionist. Like I would frog an entire scarf if I like purled instead of knit. Like,
Mhm.
and then I was like, this is not healthy. And so like, like just learning to accept mistakes. Like I'm working on the Needle Chick Swan show right now and like without color work because I was like, I don't have time for that. So I just did like a full solid and then like the sleeves and I'm at the part where I'm splitting for sleeves and like I've realized I'm like, girl, you got to work on your sleeve split because that was messy. But it's like I'm like it's correct and it's there. I am not going back. Like I'm just like just finish the damn thing. Yeah. So I really have had to like actively be like, you will not frog this. My mom, when she was teaching me to crochet, would be like, if you rip that out one more time, I'll take the hook away. Like she would be like so frustrated because she's like, it looks fine. But yeah, now I'm like a lot better. And now sometimes like when I make a mistake, I'm like, whatever, I'm just gonna fudge it. And I like move the yarn around and I'm like, oh, it looks good.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool to hear because I think that's definitely also what my path looked like. I would frog a whole sweater like I was that person, and now I'm not. And I'll like challenge myself sometimes if there's a mistake. I'm like, I'm just gonna leave it. Like I'm just gonna leave it because
Yeah.
that's growth. And I think that's a really cool idea too that I see with like students that I teach. That's like, you know what? It's fine if you get into knitting because you like the control, but I hope that being in this community, working with this craft helps you make space for mistakes when it happens and like move away from needing to have control or like being
Yeah.
perfectionist about the thing that is supposed to be bringing you some sort of joy or space to do something different.
I hear a lot of people say like, oh no, I could never knit. I would be so bad at that. And I would be like, and sometimes I'm like, well, maybe you should explore that perceived inadequacy like before you even picked up a thread of yarn. Like perhaps we should dig into that and like maybe we should try new things. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so it's like Yeah, it's so funny.
100%. It's really funny too. So over the break, we held the workshop and there weren't as many students because it was winter break and they like probably didn't want, it's all remote. So they probably didn't want to be on their computers when they didn't have to be. So we, there were a bunch of the psychologists in my center who were like, I'll join, I'll learn to knit. So there were like 5 or 6 of us in the space and then a few students. And it was so much fun to see how psychologists who are like literally doctors in this, like adapting to hard tasks and persevering and those sorts of things, how different people's responses were. That, like, one of my colleagues was like, I am not ripping it out. I do not care. It was like the most painful thing in the world to like think about frogging something. And he was like, I'll just live with the mistake forever. And it was like a mistake that was like, I can't keep knitting. And he was like, I'll just leave it on the needles and this will be it, but I cannot frog. And other people who are just like ripping out left and right, they're like, it might be wrong. I don't know. I'm ripping it out. And I'm like, oh, this is so fascinating. Just to see, I think when you learn about how someone crafts, it tells you a lot about their personality.
Yeah. I
Hmm.
love when like a teacher or like an OT or a PT or a speech therapist are like, no, I can't learn that. And I'm like, you spend all day teaching people new skills. I'm like, we should explore this one thing. But I get it. I think for some people it's like, like I mean, it's just how you're stimulated too. I think that's the component that like I always want to dismiss with people. I'm like, but it's so engaging. And people are like, that is so boring. And I'm like, but how? Like, and like for me, it's that feeling of like, oh, I made this, that you don't get from like watching a television show. Like, what do you get from watching I can do both of those at the same time, and I can have a sweater from when I finish knitting. So
Yeah. Even like other, like, I come from a pretty artsy, craftsy family. I'm the only knitter beside my grandma who taught me, but like my mom and sister, they will make things like incredibly creative. My sister's a graphic designer. My mom had a cake business. But like the knitting, they're like, I just don't understand like the knitting piece and that it takes so long. They're like, I like the making that you did it yourself, but like make like cookies or something. And I'm like, no, that makes it better that it took
yeah,
so long. Like
yeah,
that's it. Um,
yeah. It's interesting. I agree.
yeah. So I guess take this is my favorite part of these videos. And if you haven't seen any, like if you haven't seen any, or if anyone watching hasn't seen any videos before, every week I ask the maker whether it's like reflecting on their own process or something that has helped them, or maybe something they want to work on, to think about a challenge or like homework assignment for folks to try. It could be a long-term assignment. It could be something that's like short and just to try this week or whenever they get around to watching this, that will help them in their self-care journey. And I don't know if you had anything in mind that you had thought about before jumping into here, or if any thoughts have popped into your head as I am sharing that.
I think that a big one that I do sometimes, I mean, probably should do it more, but I do feel better when I talk it out loud. Like I would encourage people to like before bed, like with whomever they live with, or like check in with a friend. But like I love doing like um, we do 2 roses and a thorn, but at the end of every day, sometimes it's just like get the thorn out of the way and talk about it, because it kind of like minimizes a lot of stuff, like something throughout the day that you just thought was like so big. You're like, look, I'm literally reducing this to a funny, like, metaphor, like, oh my thorn is my car broke down, but then like really just sitting and saying like, okay, what are two things that like I want to express gratitude towards? And yeah, I mean, right next to that, the other thing that really does help me sometimes, like speaking as someone who like does have anxiety, I would say like celebrating the routine things. Like I feel like we live in this like horrifying capitalistic, like, hellscape sometimes. And like, sometimes we forget that like, it's okay to just like do a few things during the day. And like, I think that we like discount like how much energy it takes sometimes to like, just go grocery shopping, like do the laundry, like, so just like reflecting on those things and be like, wow, look at these were 4 things that I did today, and
Yep.
and celebrating those things. Yeah.
Okay. I love this for so many reasons. One, because I think a lot of times people will try and do like a gratitude journal or thinking about 3 things they're grateful for. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. And obviously I'm biased, like being in the field that I'm in, but there's something different about talking through something with someone than just keeping it in your head or like writing it down might have some sort of middle ground effect, but like getting it out of your head makes us see information differently. So like that feels so important. 1. 2, the gratitude piece is like, yeah, big time, yes. And does it like discredit the smaller things that happen? Like, I think a lot of times people are like, I'm in pandemic life, I'm in my house every day, I'm not doing different things. Like, my life looks the same from day to day. And so it feels like I don't have big things to be grateful for. And it's like, well, you don't need big things to be grateful for or to celebrate. Like, I don't know, you went to the grocery store, you took a walk around your block or whatever it is. I put on pants today. Like
Yeah.
sometimes it's the celebration. And I also really love making space for the thorn because
It's like literally why it's like why someone would go to therapy, right? To talk, hear our own thoughts and say like, wow, maybe that isn't as big as it feels
Mhm.
in my body. So like doing your thorn at night is like, so like, it's almost like liberating. It's like, wow,
Mhm.
I got you out before bed. And that's what this just reminded me, the other thing that's been interesting is that, so my partner for their birthday got, this like deck of cards, and I don't know the name of it and it's not anywhere near me, but it's like this like deck of cards that is like conversation starters, and they have like hundreds of them. They're like different themes and all this stuff, but like the one that we have is like deep, like hard hitting questions, like deep emotional questions. And like what me and my partner and my roommate do is every night we all draw one and then we talk about them out loud. And it's like just sort of this like weird moment where like it's like so vulnerable, and there's no like, you're not like showing off for anyone, you're not like, and it's just like, yeah, this is what I feel about that. Like the one today was like, oh, describe the relationship you have with your father in 1 sentence. Like,
Oh,
but you know what I mean? Like, so it like really forces you to be like, stop thinking about all the stuff that's in your head during the day and be like, wow, this morning we had to, and then this morning's was like, what's the best mistake you've ever made in your life?
oh my gosh. I want to know what that card deck is because I love that. And I
Yeah.
think you're right. Like those are the moments that people literally go to therapy and like pay for to have like a real moment of like vulnerable reflection or sharing with someone and to know that like you can share like that and someone will still accept you and be
Yeah.
knowing that is like a big deal and doesn't happen as often as I think would be great. Like, especially now we're disconnected. I think a lot of people feel isolated and like disengaged from a lot of things that we're doing. And the other thought I was having too on the thorn piece that you said is like, sometimes you talk it out and you're like, oh, wow, that really, I blew that out of proportion, or it wasn't as big of a deal. But like, also sometimes it is. And having someone be like, oh, wow, that like really sucked is just nice. Like, even if you can't do anything about it, just to be like, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And like making space for it, but then also like letting it go and
Yeah.
not having to hold on to it because it feels like you didn't, I don't know, like get validation or work through something feels like so important.
Yeah. I will share with you the card deck.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll put it in my story. So if people are listening and they want to know,
Cool.
yeah.
Cool. Because I want it for myself. My partner just came home and I'm going to tell him that I think we're going to have a new routine.
Yeah.
But then I'll share it too. I'll put it on Instagram, on the
YouTube comments.
Yep, so that people who aren't on Instagram can find it. So I love that challenge, and I think that's a nice range of, I don't know, sometimes the challenges are like, if you want to start the baby step, like here's the thing you can do. If you want to elevate it, take it to the next level, maybe it looks like this. If you want to do like the whole thing and really go all in, like here are a few different options you can sort of target connecting with someone, reflecting on something important or vulnerable that's happened to you, and a few different ways to do that. So I really like that, and I'm excited to see what that's like for folks, even if they're not like, I think sometimes when people are responding to these homework challenges, it's like, am I supposed to share my thorns and roses here? Like, does that feel weird? And like,
it's just like, oh, do them with your partner, like do them with your, yeah. And the
yeah,
good thing about that deck too is that like there are questions that are so surface level, you know what I mean? Like it's a great mix, like the dad one was like, whoa, or like, you know, like some stuff is like really deep, but then like other ones are like, you know, like if you could have one superpower, like what would it be? But it's still not something that we as adults like ask each other, you know what I mean? Like, so it feels really like, sometimes it feels really fun too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's cool. I like that. And yeah, don't like, if you're watching, don't feel like you need to share that publicly with the world, but like, I'm always interested to hear like how it went, like if you tried it, if you did any of the things, how you felt doing it. Maybe it was like a flop and it was totally not, you tried to do a thing and your partner or whoever you tried to talk to was like not about it. Like feel free to share those moments. Because
Yeah.
this is all about, like, it's not do these things and follow this formula and that's what's going to work for everyone. It's like trying things on and seeing what works for you, and maybe learning something that doesn't work, but maybe you'll learn something new about yourself through that process.
Yeah. They get easier to answer every night too, because being vulnerable is a learned skill. And so like baby steps, like with these questions, it's like slowly but surely you're like, okay, I can be free to just say what I want. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Endurance, right? Like the more you do it, the more practice you have at doing it.
Yeah.
Cool. I love that. Thank you so much, Jake, for that homework assignment. I'll post that on Instagram, but also just thank you for this talk. It was really great, like personally to get to know you, but also just to hear about your journey and about what you do and how you take care of yourself. And I know that there are going to be a lot of folks who watch this and learn a lot and reflect on a lot of things that they're doing in their life. And that's just really cool.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It was so fun chatting, getting to know you more too. And yeah, when I get off this call, I'll share that deck of cards with everybody. And if people who are watching buy the deck of cards, then let me know how it goes for
Yeah,
for you. Yeah.
for sure.
Um,
Tag me. I won't speak for Jake, but if you buy the deck, if you try the thing, definitely tag me on Instagram because I want to hear how it goes. Um, yeah. Any other last like words of wisdom or final thoughts that you have before we wrap up that just would not feel right if you didn't share them with the world.
Everyone watching this, go drink a glass of water. Just cut the crap. Go drink water. You haven't drank water all day. And I know I'm talking to every person watching this.
Oh, I feel attacked and appreciative of the reminder.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. Like, honestly, thank you so much. I'm so excited to hear about and see all of the collections you talked about. Like,
yes.
I have already been wishing for summer, but knowing that Camp Ken Yarn is like gonna be back, I'm like even more wishing for summer.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to hear about some of the other surprises along the way.
Ooh, I can't wait to share. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thanks everybody for watching. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Have a good night.